So many different words, so many different songs, and we have just one world, but we live in different worlds.
Muito bom dia a todos que estão chegando. Já temos 20 pessoas, fizemos uma grande divulgação, né? Acredito que a gente vai ter um bom número hoje. Muito bom dia a todos que estão chegando. Hoje nós temos então esse webinar com a presença de Pedro Ferreira, diretamente de Portugal. É isso, Pedro? Que cidade você está?
Lisboa.
Lisboa, grande, joia. Nós temos Nippin Anand, o grande, enorme Nippin Anand, diretamente do Reino Unido. Nippin, fala pra gente em que cidade você está agora?
I am in the sunny Aberdeen. It's
Ah,
actually sunny today for a change.
muito bem, muito bem. Joia. Nós temos aqui os nossos moderadores, Valdir Lima, Sabrina Spier, meus grandes companheiros de caminhada na psicologia social do risco, né? A gente costuma dizer que a gente é discípulo do Robert Long. Particularmente, eu não gosto do termo discípulo. Eu gosto de dizer que nós somos aprendizes do Robert Long, né? Na psicologia social do risco. Bom dia, Valdir. Bom dia, Sabrina. Que prazer enorme ter vocês aqui.
Bom dia, Gilval, Valdir, Pedro, Nipim, nosso intérprete Felipe. Muito bom estar aqui junto hoje, nesse sábado de manhã. Fala aqui de Novo Hamburgo, no Rio Grande do Sul. Somos aprendizes aí há cerca de 3 anos, do Dr. Robert Long, né? Um grande mentor, um grande alimentador de conceitos que fazem muito sentido na nossa vida, na nossa prática profissional. Então, estamos aqui numa caminhada muito bonita, eu diria, de repensar alguns pensamentos, vamos dizer, refletir sobre algumas práticas, né? E dar oportunidade para coisas novas nos fazerem justamente essa reflexão. Então, hoje estamos trazendo para os nossos colegas brasileiros um pouco da nossa caminhada aí, do Nipim, junto com o livro que ele está nos presenteando aí com a informação e o conhecimento dele.
Fantástico, Sabrina. Valdir.
Bom dia a todos. Primeiramente, estou muito feliz de estar aqui com meus amigos, né? Bom dia, Juval, Sabrina, Pedro, é um prazer enorme. Grande Nipim, Felipe, que vai traduzir aí para a gente. Né? Como a Sabrina falou, a gente está aí nessa jornada com Psicologia Social do Risco, o professor Robert Long, que com sua grande generosidade, né, de trazer esses conhecimentos para a gente, nunca cobrou nada, né, para a gente, sempre se colocou disponível. São conceitos que fazem muito sentido, que são muito modernos, né? Então, espero que vocês gostem do nosso webinar, que vai ser incrível.
Excelente, Valdir. Bom, então, sem mais delongas, vamos iniciar propriamente dito. Atenção, pessoal. O Nipim, ele vai apresentar tudo em inglês. Nós temos a tradução simultânea do rapidíssimo, do veloz Felipe Brito. Quem precisar da tradução simultânea, vai aqui embaixo, na telinha do Zoom, vai colocar tem um mundinho, aqui você vai escolher português, tá? Se você quer escutar a tradução simultânea do Felipe. Beleza? Joia. Qualquer dúvida, coloca aqui. Bom, como é que vai ser o roteiro rapidinho? O Nipim vai apresentar, né? Todo o material que ele trouxe, com o apoio também do Pedro, né? Então, o Nipim apresenta o material dele sobre sobre esse material que ele quer compartilhar conosco, né, sobre a psicologia social do risco. Ele vai passar por esse assunto que nos causa tanta curiosidade, que é o evento do Costa Concórdia, e no final ele vai anunciar um grande evento presencial que nós vamos ter aqui no Brasil com Pedro e Nippin, onde eu, o Valdir, a Sabrina, entre outros, vamos ter o enorme prazer de estar lá no Rio de Janeiro com o Nippin, e eu já vou advertir o Nippin. Nippin, eu vou te dar um abraço tão forte que eu vou quebrar pelo menos 2 costelas suas, tá? Né? Porque são muitos anos querendo te ver pessoalmente. Pedro, pelo menos uma costela sua eu quebro, tá certo? Nippin vai apresentar para a gente também as datas desse evento gigantesco aqui no Brasil. Gente, já falei demais. Nippin, por favor, compartilhe o que você tem para compartilhar conosco.
Great. So can we start then?
Sim, sim.
Okay. I'll start with a story. I like to tell stories, and even before I tell a story, I want to share an image with you. This is a rain stick, and the sad part is that when I turn it, you can't hear anything because the pod mic does not pick it up, the sound, but it makes the sound of rain. And the Aboriginals believed that when they don't have any rain, all you need to do is turn this rain stick, make the noise, and the rain will appear, right? So that's a belief. People believe in it. I'll tell you another story now. And I just wrote it this morning, so I'm going to share with you what I wrote. And I wrote that it just happened yesterday. I met with a safety manager, and he said, just yesterday, and he said, we've done a culture survey in our organization, and the survey results shows that we have a speak up problem in our organization. Nobody speaks up. Can you help us with this? We need some training in psychological safety. And my question is, can you see what is happening here? How we came to this conclusion. First, people not speaking up means it is a problem of psychological safety. And second, no one really understands what psychological safety means, right? So how can something be a solution to a problem when we don't even understand what the solution actually does? Can you see the jump from speak up to psychological safety? Sometimes cancer patients can get cured by just eating sugar pills, and that's called the halo effect. It's a belief, right? And when you hear Professor Amy Edmondson talking, she also says the same thing. Listen to this. Psychological safety is a belief. It's a belief that people will not be punished for speaking up or sharing their concerns and ideas. It's a belief, right? So once you believe in something, you know what happens, right? You can have all the data in the world, you can have all the narratives in the world, you can have all evidence in the world, and it will make it work, your belief. So you genuinely believe that psychological safety will work for you because you believe in it. So even if you don't understand it, that's fine. What is important is believe. So on that note, I want to start off this conversation by saying, be careful what questions you ask, because whatever questions you ask don't come from nowhere. The questions that you ask, whether in an accident investigation, or when you face an uncertain situation, or a novel situation, or a surprise, or a turbulence, they come from your belief, what you believe in. And the funny thing is, most of us don't know what we believe in. So it's from time to time, and particularly when you get the same kind of accidents and incidents in your organization and they keep coming back to you, it's a good idea to reframe your questions, to ask a different kind of question, to ask an open question, because then you might learn something about where your beliefs, where your imagination is stuck. I'm going to tell you a story now to make this point, and I'm going to tell you the story of the Costa Concordia because it's been on my mind for the last 3 weeks or so. You can actually listen to this story and in your own time on YouTube. I've just posted it, but I thought it's a wonderful opportunity to share this with you. I will not go into as much detail as there is on YouTube. Nevertheless, it will give you a flavor. And then once we finish the story, I would love that you ask some difficult question and say, I don't believe in any of this. It's total crap. I'll be so happy if we engage and you tell me I don't believe in anything, Nippin. It gives me so much happiness. But ask an open question. It's so important. Ask an open question and then we will have a conversation. Is that good for now, Jilwal? Shall I start sharing?
Sim, por
Okay.
favor, pode começar.
Okay, all right. Great. Somebody has to tell me that you can see my screen. Okay. All right, great. So as some of you know, I have been involved in this incident for a very, very long time now. And this is the case of the Costa Concordia that went aground on the 12th of January 2012 in Italy. And I happened to interview the captain of the ship, Captain Francesco Schettino. And I interviewed him about 5 years after the accident. And I still think about it a lot, that what is it that I did during the interview that he spoke for almost 12 hours nonstop on record, without asking too many questions, very few questions actually. And I think the closest thing that comes to mind is that the genuine desire to leave your agenda on one side and listen to people. And that I think is very, very rare in this industry, in the risk and safety industry. I call it industry. I don't call it culture. I don't call it group. I just call it an industry, right? So it's a pervasive problem in this industry. And it's so fascinating that you will hear the only voice that is missing in most accident investigation reports is the voice of the people who are actually involved in the accident. And it's so fascinating. So I hear him with an open mind, asking open questions, and I came to a completely different view from what was presented in the public domain. And my point really is that if you want to learn something, keep an open mind, because the moment you ask a question, any question, you will fall within the trap of the framing of your question. So today's topic is all about realizing the power of how we ask questions, how we frame our questions. Framing is a bit like you take a picture when you go somewhere, and the picture that you take on your camera reveals as much as it hides. The things that you choose to take, the things that you choose to focus, the things that you choose not to focus, it all forms part of the frame. Sometimes what I do, I take a picture of me in front of the mirror just to say that I cannot hide myself when I take a picture. It's that simple. So whatever picture you take, it's your subjective view. It's how you see the world, how you want to show the world what you want to show. So be careful what questions you ask, because that's your belief, that's your framing, right? So I'm not going to cover everything, but I'll give you a flavor of what I'm going to talk about. The whole accident investigation narrative is framed as a problem of speaking up and not speaking up, that a ship collides and nobody speaks to the captain, right? And because nobody speaks to the captain, This is a problem of psychological safety, bridge resource management, crew resource management, non-technical skills, and so on. So you can see how we make the jump between speaking up and crew resource management and psychological safety. No different. Absolutely nothing different from this rain stick. Yeah, it's a belief, right? We believe that there is a connection between people not speaking up and lack of bridge resource management training or psychological safety. Same, no different. So we will talk about that, and we will briefly touch upon, if we have the time, why does this idea appeal so much to this industry as a whole? In fact, it appeals a lot to the HR industry also, I've seen. People in the human resources love this idea of speaking up. And we will, if we have time, we'll talk about how can we understand speaking up from another perspective, from a different perspective, right? So the power of framing and why we should never underestimate the power of framing. Be very, very cautious. I will repeat that. Be very cautious about the question that you ask if you want to investigate an accident. Very careful, because that question will then decide where the investigation will take you. Right. As you can see in this picture, this comes from my own life experience. There is a captain and a chief officer on board a back deck of a ship. And the captain says, "Mr. Grabowski, can we please get rid of this pole?" "But why, Captain? He's performing so well." The pole is an expression of a hazard or a risk that is sticking on the deck, but pole is also an expression of a Polish person, very, very colloquially speaking. So we are in two different modes. We are in two different worlds talking about the same thing. And that is what framing does. The other person has no idea what your frame of mind is, because you come from one belief, one metaphor, one way of thinking, one way of living, and the other person comes from a different world. So here we have two different cultures right in front of you. Seeing pole is two different things. That is the power of framing. It's very, very important to understand that the question that you're asking may not be the question that the other person thinks you are asking. So I will skip this. So the idea of speaking up is at the heart of this discussion today. Why don't people speak up? And the trouble is that speaking up involves at least one more person. In order for you to speak up, somebody else must listen. In order for you to speak up, somebody else in position of power must listen. So there are two issues here, an issue of relationship and an issue of politics and ethics. And both are by and large absent in the risk and safety discourse, which is the language that we speak in risk and safety, does not give importance to relationships and ethics or politics. Fascinating, huh? So we end up in this situation where we have one after another accident, time and again, when nobody's slowing down to say, maybe I've got the framing of my questions wrong. Maybe I'm stuck in my imagination, as Jung said so beautifully in this quote. So, as I said to you earlier, I'm an anthropologist and a social psychologist, and I don't believe in giving definitions. If you ask me a question, I will take you on a walk. I will tell you a story, like I did in the beginning. And that is how people learn. People learn when you tell stories, when you take them on a walk. You don't give definitions to people when you want them to learn. You tell them a nice story. Stories bring the unconscious to the surface in ways that propositional learning, classroom teaching will never do, because it starts from here. Stories start from here, and that's how you learn, right? Of course, it's not to say training is not important, but one needs to keep a balance between training and learning. They're two different things. So with that in mind, I actually had the opportunity to meet with the captain, spend 4 days with him in his hometown, Sorrento in Meta, and I had some wonderful conversations with an open mind. Very few questions asked, mostly open questions, and he responded so well, which is where it brought me to a completely different view of this accident and many other accidents that I've researched in my life, from one that was presented in the public domain as well as in the accident investigation report. There are many aspects of this accident which I will cover in the next few weeks. I will be posting more videos out from my book, but for now we will just focus on speaking up and psychological safety. How do they come together, or do they? Right? So you can read my book, and here's the accident investigation report. And as you can see, the captain is the cause of this accident. That's it. It's simple, right? But maybe it's not that simple. And I will not play this video. This is the moments before the ship actually hit the rocks. There's no point. You can watch the YouTube video later. It's got everything. My point is that this is the idea that when people see this, they get very, very emotionally triggered. They start to believe that how is it possible that nobody speaks to the captain when the ship is heading straight into the rocks? Nobody speaks to him. There's a complete silence. What is happening here? So, and we immediately make the conclusion that this is a problem of speaking up and bridge resource management and psychological safety. Felipe, am I going at the right pace? Would you like me to slow down a little bit? I'm happy to work with whatever works for you. Okay, please interrupt me if you need to. I don't mind that at all. Okay, so here's the accident, and here's the various people on the bridge. And the question is, why won't they and why don't they speak up, right? This is the bridge full of people, right? And if you go back to the Tenerife air disaster in 1977, it's been almost 40, 50 years, 77 to 2024, almost 50 years. And the narrative of accidents has not changed. This is the power of myth. This is mythology at work. This is the Anglo-Saxon mythology at work. The accident occurred because the co-pilot did not question the judgment of the pilot. The co-pilot knew the correct course of action, but did not feel psychologically safe to question the pilot. The co-pilot would die rather than questioning the authority. If the co-pilot had spoken, the crash would not happen. So we now train our people. We even have protocols for them to speak up, and when they don't, we reprimand them. This is the Greek mythology at play. Defiance. The idea that I don't care about your power. The defiance of hierarchy, the challenging of authority. This is the classic Greek mythology at play. The Hollywood narratives, as some would call it, right? And then we look at Professor Amy Edmondson's work, and we see that there is a belief at play, as I spoke to you about. There's a belief that people should speak up and bring their concerns up when they face injustice, right? Very similar, very similar. So what happens is then that we frame the accident as a problem of speaking up, managing error, controlling error, crew resource management, and in the maritime world, we call it bridge resource management. It's no different, the same thing, right? So you can read all this in the accident investigation report, but the entire report is framed around the idea that this was a failure of bridge resource management. You look at the investigation, and it points towards bridge resource management, failure of bridge resource management, which is the equivalent of crew resource management in the shipping industry, in the aviation world. Right, so how do we frame the solution now? Now we have framed a problem, which is a problem of speaking up and crew, and how we resolve this issue is very simple, is that we need to give people training in what some people call soft skills or non-technical skills. So we genuinely believe that you can make a divide between non-technical and technical, like people can make a divide between left brain and right brain. So something is missing in the behavioral skills, give them that behavioral skills in the left-hand side, right? So this takes a 3 to 5 days course, give people that training, and we are back in the business. We are happy again, right? And I think that needs to be challenged a little bit. We need to be a little bit critical. And all this is happening, why? Because we have framed it as a problem of failure of crew resource management, which comes from speaking up. So you can see the rain stick all throughout. The Aboriginals believed in the rain stick. When you play the rain stick, the rain will come. When you don't speak up, it's a problem of crew resource management, and give people some soft skills. It's the same rain stick. It's the same belief at play. So fascinating. Until you speak to the captain, and I let him speak, and he'll give you a different view of the accident.
I am sad that the industry, is organizing many, leadership training, whatever, and I appreciate this. But this is not a matter of leadership. This is the very start of the education of a deck cadet, where even if you know how to share the information, but before of sharing the information, you must have this professional skill to recognize the danger. If you don't recognize the danger, how can you share the information with the others? And who captains, if an officer says, Captain, we are one cable from a rock, doesn't react. The problem is that I have reason to believe that nobody had the experience to recognize the danger and to overestimate the professionalism of the captain, that maybe he can have some magician way out, maybe because the captain is so skillful, is so a good seaman that he has his own way to don't provoke the accident. Come on, we are going ahead. I show you the black box. It's unbelievable. When I saw that white foam, I don't know how I didn't faint.
Right? So you can hear the captain speaking, and some people actually get very angry when they see him. They feel that he's so rude and he's so impolite. And you know what is happening? It's not him, it's us losing control of our emotions. It has nothing to do with that person. And this has been such a repeated theme in my work that every time he appears, people get very angry. Why are we angry? Just watching something on the screen. Because we get very emotional and we lose control of our body, right? Anyway, but the point is to listen to the message, not to the messenger. The important thing is to engage with the message. What is he trying to say? And it's very easy to shoot the messenger. Listen to the message. Listen to his, and that message actually changed my life many years ago. I started to see this in much, much bigger scale across industries, this problem, which I'll come to in a minute. And that happens, first, you ask an open question. Two, you allow another person to speak. And you see things from their frame of mind, not your frame of mind, which is very hard, very, very hard. I'll repeat that, it's one of the hardest thing to do is to step into another person's frame of mind. Very hard. So one of the turning points in this investigation was when the captain told us that there was a jacuzzi on the ship, like a place where you can, I'm sure you know jacuzzi. So you have a lot of jacuzzis in the cruise ships. And one of the jacuzzis was supposed to be filled with seawater, salt water, but it was actually filled with fresh water on that particular day. So the captain asked his crew, said, why is it filled with fresh water and why not seawater? And the officer responded by saying, well, the trouble is that the seawater pump is not working. So we just filled it with fresh water. The captain said, no big deal. There is some salt tablets in the hospital. Bring some salt tablets and put it in the jacuzzi and everything will be fine. The officer did that. The captain came back next day and asked, the water still tastes very fresh. Have you not done anything about it? The officer said, I did. The captain said, and how many tablets did you put? The officer responded, 3. 3 tablets in a jacuzzi. And there's a symbolic message here, which is that a captain who has been at sea for so many years has completely lost trust in his people because he believes that if you don't understand the principles of salinity of water, the Archimedes principle of density, then you are not fit to be a good officer. And therein, there is a breakdown of trust. And that was a trigger point to see what the hell is happening here. So I went back, I've researched labor markets for many years in my life. And one of the things that I went to was to see what was the trend in the labor market prior to this accident. What was the supply and demand of the crew? What was the supply and demand of the crew's services prior to this accident? I pulled out the data for the last 10 years and I saw some fascinating results. This is the supply and demand of cruise services in the last 10 years. And as you can see, a huge increase in demand globally and within Europe, and a huge demand in supply, which is new ships coming out in the last 10 years. In the Mediterranean alone, 160% increase in the number of ships, huge increase. And what happens is, when there's an increase in demand and supply, what happens is there's a shortage of people. I just want to slow down a little bit here and say why it is so important to look at all this, because you have to look at the problem more holistically. Safety does not operate as an isolated thing. Safety operates within an ecosystem. And for you to understand the ecosystem, you have to go and ask different kind of questions. You have to be open to everything, technical, operational, HR, everything. So don't be scared to go into the forest and get lost for a little while. That's how you will learn. You will challenge the framing of your mind. It's all about opening up the frame of your mind and seeing more things. Sometimes the result you get will be contradictory. Sometimes they will confirm what you know. And it's very, very important that things that contradict with your belief, you start to look at them more carefully, because that's the only way you can learn. And most people don't do that. We are so scared to look at things that we don't believe in. In fact, there is a very interesting story in the Indian mythology, which is that when the cat comes to the pigeon closes its eyes, thinking that the cat will disappear. And you know what happens then. So the industry responds by promoting the officers fast, because there's a huge shortage of skills, and what we call production line training, which is mass training of people, right? And therein lies a very interesting problem, that traditionally this industry has been very hierarchical, and it takes a very, very long time to become a captain from a cadet. But with faster promotions, you can actually start to compress that time. So it typically takes 15 to 20 years to turn somebody from a cadet to captain. But with promotions, you can bring it down to, let's say, 10 to 12 years. And therein lies some very interesting problems. So what you see is that, and this is something to watch. I don't know if you can see my cursor. The gap between, so this is the cadet, this is the third officer, this is the second officer, chief officer and captain. This is the hierarchy on board the ship. What happens is that once you're a captain, you only grow in your experience. Yeah, you just stay in your rank and you keep accumulating more experience. But when you are a second officer or a third officer and you are in that position and the captain is increasing his or her rank and experience, this distance starts to increase between very experienced people and not so experienced people. The other interesting thing is that many junior officers at sea don't choose this career, this profession for a long time. They come to this position as a junior officer and they quit, they leave. So we have an interesting dynamic here, which we call skill gradient. Yeah, this distance between junior officers and senior officers starts to increase. So you might have something similar in your organization. There are some very, very experienced people, and there are some people who have very little experience in the job, right? And that gap starts to grow. And that's a fascinating thing to think about, I believe. So traditionally, the industry has always been hierarchical, from captain to chief officer, or from cadet to junior officer to senior officer to captain. But what you see on the right-hand side is where we are heading now as an industry. You have some very, very experienced people and some people who don't have enough experience, and that gap starts to increase, right? And therein lies a problem which we call skill gradient, which is the difference of domain-specific knowledge between ranks, between positions, becomes large, significantly large. It's different from the traditional hierarchy that we had, which was a little bit more steady. This goes like this. It almost goes like this, right? I think that's an interesting problem. And the interesting thing what you have to think about now is, how does going from speaking up to psychological safety and training in non-technical skills would actually help? Question to ask. Yeah. So traditional hierarchy versus another kind of culture that we call expert versus novices. Yeah. So how does this culture become so powerful? The interesting thing is that regulators, commercial organizations, companies are so interested in wanting to make sure that this person has enough experience, has enough knowledge, has enough training, certification, but we give very, very little importance to all these people, except that they have a license on the paper. Yeah. So my point really is that regulation, certification, commercial entities are actually unknowingly promoting this pattern. Unknowingly. They are encouraging this pattern because it meets their needs. The trouble is that when you have an accident, and this is another example, a classic example, Ethiopian Airlines flight, where the co-pilot had only 200 hours of experience as against the pilot. You can already see how these things work, right? There's another example. This is not just a problem of Costa Concordia or the cruise line industry or the maritime world. It's a pervasive problem across industries. And a lot of people will tell you, don't study accidents, go and study normal work, everyday work. What people don't realize is that the nuances, the details that you get from these accidents actually can tell you so much more than what you can get from asking questions about everyday work. The wealth of information, these are all systemic issues that are hidden underneath. Nobody would know if a graduate was flying the plane with a very experienced pilot on a normal day. Nobody would know. Nobody would even question that. But in these moments, this kind of information starts to float. So my appeal to you is that do not lose sight of learning from accidents. It's very important. Of course, we have to learn from everyday work, but we should look at things a little bit more critically and in more balance, right? So here's a captain surrounded by junior officers. The important thing to understand is this, and this is very, very interesting in many professions, including medical sciences, including other high-skilled work in cockpits, that the captain is not just the boss, is not just the manager of the asset. He's also a teacher, right? He's training other people. He's navigating the ship. He's the overall in charge. He's also the trainer. And he switches between the captain and the trainer many, many times during the day. So when you talk about speaking up, many people will not speak up in my culture where I come from, simply because you're talking to a teacher. They see him as a teacher. And I'm sure Brazilian cultures is very similar, very respectful to the teacher. right? So we have a problem here which is not so straightforward, right? So be careful how you frame your question. Is it a problem of speaking up? Is it that simple? And is the solution really psychological safety? Let's look at a few examples. So in communication training, which is soft skills and non-technical skills, there is so much emphasis on saying, Gilwal, I need you to do this. And Gilwal will respond by saying, okay, I understood, I need to do this. So the communication loop is closed. Yeah, but that's very superficial. What is happening here is because the gap between experienced people and not so experienced people is so steep that there is no trust in the communication. And when there is no trust in the communication, the closed loop doesn't help. The basis of all communication is trust. The basis of all conversation is trust. When I don't trust you because you only put 3 pills, 3 tablets in the jacuzzi, this does not help. This is too superficial, right? Similarly, sometimes the ships will go in very, very busy areas, very, very busy waters like Singapore Straits and English Channel and many other parts of the world where there are many, many ships. And there is a tendency to put more people on the bridge so that the captain can get some extra help because it's a lot of traffic. He has to do a lot of work. The trouble is exactly that. You have students around you. You have people who don't have enough experience. So instead of being of help to you, they are cognitively making you more stressed. It's nobody's fault. It's how it is. It's how the whole thing plays out. Yeah. So when in doubt, speak out. The trouble is, what should I say? When should I say? How should I say? And my point is that simple. Psychological safety and crew resource management training cannot be a substitute for experience and knowledge that you need. It's not a substitute. It can help, but it's not a substitute. And by framing the question in the way we do, we have fallen into the trap of that. Now, there's one way of understanding this, which is in social psychology of risk. We call it 1 brain and 3 minds. I will, for those of you who don't know this, I'll just help you with this. Most people, what you see in the middle is a model, and you see 3 modes of being, 3 modes of thinking as human beings. So if you take an example from the time you started to drive a car or you entered into a profession, you go from mind 1 to mind 2 to mind 3, which means you start off a job, somebody gives you instructions, somebody gives you formal training, you get trained, you're very slow, you're very systematic, you're very analytical, you gain that knowledge, and then you move into mind 2, where you can do a lot of work without guidance. So Gilwal probably needs Valdir in the first few days to monitor him, to supervise him. After a few days, Gilwal will tell Valdir, I don't need you. I feel comfortable that I can do it on my own. What that means is Gilwal has now progressed to mind 2 until he goes on to practice that work in mind 2. And one day he tells Valdir, sorry, Valdir, you have to retire and look for another job because I think I can do everything now. I know everything. So this is when Valdir has to look for a new job because Gilwal is an expert now and he knows everything. So my point is that this is how most people go from being novice to an expert, like this, right? And what you see on the bridge of the Costa Concordia are mainly 2 different cultures. In one culture or in one subculture, which is new people, they operate as novices, very slow, very risk averse. They don't like to take too many risks, very inefficient, very explicit. They want procedures, they want processes, and very systematic. Working with people who are in mind 3, like the captain, expert, fast, very confident, sometimes overconfident, very efficient. That's why he's been employed as a captain. Because if he has to go and look for a process every time or a procedure every time, then he won't be an expert, right? And the interesting thing is the moment he makes a mistake, we bring him back to mind 1 and we start to judge him in mind 1. We don't realize that he was operating in mind 3. And therein lies a problem, right? So you can see that there are 2 subcultures here at play. And my point is that we don't quite appreciate the cultural nature of this problem, the relational nature of this problem, by putting a label of psychological safety and non-technical skills. We frame it as a problem of an individual. But when we start to look at it as a problem of two different subcultures, or maybe more than two, you start to look at it more as a relational problem, as a political problem. Remember what I said in the beginning? We are silent on relational problems, we are silent on ethical problems, we are silent on political problems. And the trouble is, that's where the real issue lies. So you can obviously read it on my book. It's in much detail, but I will keep it short. And actually, my point is that I would like to take some questions. I don't like to talk. It's good to hear what you guys think, but the important thing is reframing is not a technique. I can give you a set of questions. Here's a set of questions, and you can go and ask this question. But reframing is more than a technique. You have to learn how to ask open-ended questions without being too caught up in your belief, in your own rain stick. Yeah, when the other person gives you answers, when the other person engages with you, you have to leave your rain stick on one side and actually listen. And we are not very good at that across industries, particularly people in position of power, particularly because they don't want to be seen as people who don't know enough. Just because you have the power and authority, you must know everything. And therein lies a problem, right? So why did no one speak up? I hope that I've given you enough to think about. And now let's start to have a good question and answers round where you will have to disagree with me, because that's how we learn from each other.
Muito bom, Nippin. Muitíssimo obrigado. Eu queria passar a palavra para a Sabrina. Sabrina, você gostaria de comentar? Você tem já alguma pergunta para começar? E depois a gente vai para as perguntas do público, que já temos algumas aqui.
Sim, muito obrigada, pessoal, por colocarem as perguntas aqui. Uma pergunta do público aqui. Flap Engenharia. Na analogia apresentada de que os profissionais estão entrando no mercado sem treinamento adequado e sendo promovido rapidamente, outras indústrias serão afetadas da mesma forma e a criticidade será bem alta, como, por exemplo, a aviação. Como evitar outros acidentes devido a esse problema de treinamento e promoção dos novatos?
Yeah, it's a great question because what you're asking is that what is actually missing in our current approach to learning, right? And my suggestion is that we have been doing a lot of education and training across industries, but we spend very little time on learning. Learning takes a very different approach. And I go back to your famous philosopher, Paulo Freire, from whom I've learned so much, is that the real learning is actually being a little bit more critically conscious. Education for Critical Consciousness. What a wonderful book to read. And the idea is that we don't do that enough. We also are missing on experiential learning, which is all about the semiotic walks that we talk about in social psychology of risk. We talk about the IQ method, where you start to map conversation. And the process of mapping itself is so sensory motor driven that you do things with your hand, you map things with your hand. So you're learning with your body, and then it goes into the mind. The trouble is that all the training today, and its training, is classroom training. One person speaks and everyone else faces them on the chairs. And I think that approach needs to change. So we need to move away from these brain-centric ideas of training and promote other ways of learning. And we need to put more emphasis on learning. That's what I would say.
Ok. Eu tenho uma pergunta, tá? Ao longo da leitura, a leitura do livro, que chamou muita atenção sobre o bode expiatório, que em português a tradução do scapegoating, que é um mecanismo psicológico chamado mimética, que desencadeia esse processo de chamar de bode expiatório, que foi o caso do capitão Schettino. Poderia nos explicar como ocorre esse processo e como interfere nas investigações de acidentes?
I will keep it brief because the thing is that I don't want to deviate from the topic today, but I'll still answer the question. The trouble is that most people don't realize that the actual purpose of an accident investigation is to preserve the status quo, is to preserve social and political order in the society. So, and the easiest way to resolve that conflict is to find somebody to blame. And we don't get it. We don't get it in the risk and safety industry when we say blame fixes nothing. Of course, blame fixes a lot of things. If we didn't blame Captain Schettino on that night, the cruise industry would have stopped operating. Right? So what scapegoating does, and we have been doing that for 3,000 years across cultures, across civilizations, is really to create, to preserve the political and social order. And that's what you call the ritual of accident investigation. But I will expand on this in a proper session. I will do a video on this and I'll pass it on to you. I'm in the process of doing that right now. You can also read it in my book. It's in much detail.
Mais uma pergunta aqui do público, então, que veio do Paulo Alexandre. As organizações, de uma forma em geral, de qualquer ramo, buscam produtividade, produzir mais com menos. Isso reflete mais demanda de trabalho e menos tempo disponibilizado para comunicação, trocas, experiências e lições aprendidas. Quais gatilhos podemos provocar um diálogo para ambos os lados?
So your question really is that because productivity seems to dominate the discussions or the organizational life, what can we do to promote the awareness that learning is as important as productivity, if not less? Is that your question?
Sim,
I just want to make sure
yes,
Yeah, it's a really good question actually, and I honestly don't know if there is a simple answer to this. My suggestion is that you you need to, the Japanese were so right actually that they had this wonderful balance between productivity and learning, and it has to go in the unconscious, which basically means that without questioning, people really believe that learning and training is important. So I would actually start off with what we call a language audit in an organization, and put a word like leadership to them and say, what are the first few words that come to mind when you use the word leadership? And interestingly, learning is probably not in that list at all. And making it visible to the organization that if you don't have learning in this organization, then you don't have innovation. You don't have anything. You have no sharing of experiences. So stop repeating yourself in accident investigation that an accident happened because of lack of awareness or lack of situational awareness or people not following procedures. There is a good reason why it is the way it is that learning is missing in your own unconscious. You make it visible to the organization and then show them the way that there are simple ways to integrate learning into everyday routine. And I would use the word ritual, not routine, because once you ritualize learning, then nobody questions it. The trouble is, the first time you put a whiteboard in a mess room or a facility, and you start to explain to people why or how you can do the same toolbox talk, where it's not one person talking and 10 people listening, but you can start to make it a conversational mapping. And people actually discuss these things. We map them on a whiteboard. And so you shift from the ritual of training, which is all about power and dominance, to a ritual of learning, which is about participation. And you slowly start to show the organization You don't need to change. You don't need to shake the power. You need to shake the status quo. All you need is slowly start to bring and change the ritual of training to a ritual of learning. But it has to be a ritual, not a routine, because ritual is symbolic. There is symbolic meaning in it.
Muito bom, Nipinho. Eu tenho uma outra pergunta. Como profissional da área, então, de segurança no trabalho, aqueles que estão começando nessa caminhada de trabalhar o aprendizado, né? Quem está passando da forma exclusiva de treinamento para processos de aprendizagem no seu dia a dia e que está querendo fazer, mas ainda está preso a uma mentalidade anterior. Qual o primeiro passo para evoluir para o processo de para trabalhar a aprendizagem? E eu, enquanto profissional, que farei esse movimento.
Yeah, again, a great question. If I dare say one thing, that in this industry, we don't help people understand the difference between training and learning. We have written so many books in this industry, but I haven't seen a single book which actually talks about what is learning. So people are often confused and they mix between the term training and learning. They're two completely different things. And if you have to start from somewhere, you have to make this distinction clear to people that yes, there is time when we have to tell people that this is how you need to do it and that's it. But there are also times when you actually have to learn with people and from them. And I think we don't make it explicit. The other thing, and I've already mentioned it before, a lot of learning starts from the body, from the gestures, from the body, from the emotions, from the heart. It doesn't start from here. It's not brain-centric. So simple things like if you're organizing a training session, go and do it outside. Go and take a walk with people. Go and ask them, you go on a site visit, and instead of telling them, this is what you should be doing, ask them, what does it mean to you? You change the idea from training to learning. But you can only do that when you understand the difference, the fundamental difference between training and learning. I've actually drawn a mandala on this. I'll show you if you don't mind. Would you like to see?
Yes.
Okay. I think you're going to love this mandala, all of you. I loved it. So I didn't draw it myself, but I had somebody who helped me out with this, and I think that she did a wonderful job. And the time is this is a good time to present it. It's so keynote. Yeah. Look at this mandala. It's so beautiful. So this is a dialectic or a tension between learning and training. In training, as you can see, everything at the top is about seeing people as a solution, right? So you have people like a key, the symbol of a key. The people are a solution. In learning, you don't try to solve problems. You try to meet people where they are, right? Look at the semiotic. It's from seeing people as a solution or trying to solve problems, you get together and meet people where they are, right? You see the idea of the original sin on the left-hand side, which is all training is about disciplining people, right? On the other hand, it's the idea of embracing fallibility. It's not controlling people, it's actually embracing people for who they are. In training, it's all about the person, the individual, taking them through tests and assessments and so on. In learning, it's all about meeting with people. It's relational. It's not individual, it's relational, right? In training, it's all disembodied, which is all brain-centric. You talk and people listen. And in learning, it starts from the gut and the heart. It's all embodied, right? It's training. You find ways to project and get and sometimes even blame people when they don't do well. In learning, it's helping people to see themselves in the mirror and realize their own biases. In training, it's all linear, it's all domino effect. In learning, it's all about questioning what lies ahead in relationships. So you go out with people and you ask them questions in relationships. Things are not so straightforward. It's not the binary linear thinking. It's not the domino effect anymore. In training, it's all about the disembodied relationships. How you doing? Not so bad. In learning, it's about meeting the person where he or she is. So this is a mandala. This is a hand-drawn mandala that you actually, and it's in my book actually. The first 8 chapters are dedicated to the idea of what is learning and how is it different from training. Spend a lot of time thinking about this. Yes.
Fantástico, Nippin. Muito linda essa mandala. Eu faria um quadro com ela. Muito lindo mesmo. Sabrina, deixa eu trazer uma pergunta fantástica aqui do nosso amigo Josué. O Josué, que o Nippin vai encontrá-lo lá no Rio de Janeiro. Josué é um profissional da Petrobras, um grande professor, né, e um grande amigo meu, e ele trouxe uma pergunta fantástica. E ele diz assim: Olá, Nippin, que fantástico você gostar do Paulo Freire. Ele disse uma vez que o aprendizado deve ter significado. Como aprender, então, eficazmente com os acidentes, quando uma evidência ou uma melhoria tem perspectivas diferentes de pessoas diferentes?
Yeah, I knew this is going to be, it is a wonderful question. A wonderful question, by the way. We seem, and this came from Steve Shorrock, my very close friend. You would see in many of my illustrations that I draw that there is an anthropomorphic theme. There is an animal at the top, and there's a human body at the bottom. And the idea is that organizations we have this anthropomorphic idea of every organization. And we use the word learning organization and organizational learning. I think we need to talk about people. Organizations don't learn, people learn. I learn, you learn, we learn. So when you talk about learning, don't worry what your colleague thinks or what your boss thinks about it. The important thing is, what am I learning? That's the question and you need to ask yourself. I've done this investigation. I've done this incident review. Look back at myself. What has changed in my world? What has really changed? Have my habits changed? Has my language changed? Have the way I have been doing things automatically changed? When I look out of the window, do I see more things than I used to see yesterday? The same window, same window. So think about what has changed in your world. Don't think about the organization. Don't think about your colleagues. Learning is a very personal journey, very personal journey.
Fantástico, Nippin. Muitíssimo obrigado. Eu queria sugerir que o Valdir escolhesse uma pergunta. A gente tem muitas perguntas, Nippin. As perguntas estão pipocando. Eu queria que o Valdir escolhesse aí mais uma ou duas perguntas, e aí a gente precisa falar um pouco sobre o evento no Brasil. E eu queria convidar o Nippin e o Pedro, depois dessas perguntas que o Valdir vai trazer, para falarem um pouco de como vai ser o evento no Brasil, quando e tal. Tragam detalhes e vocês podem também até compartilhar a tela com o site de inscrição, gente. Vai lá, Valdir.
Então, tem muitas perguntas, né? Então, nosso amigo Leônidas foi uma das primeiras pessoas que perguntaram, e é o seguinte, naquela escala lá de cargos, né? De experiências, as pessoas que estão no meio da escala, digamos, suboficiais, estão conscientes da sua falta de conhecimento?
It all happens in the unconscious. Most people are not aware what they don't know. It's a very hard one. And there's many ways to look at the one brain and three minds model, but I'll share with you the screen once again, and we should definitely talk about that. I think you're going to love this one. It's something that keeps me awake these days a lot. So yeah, and you can tell me if you think it's making any sense or not, and then we can have a conversation. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah. The essence of all expertise is to once you've gone past mind one and entered into mind three, is to come back to mind one as and when you face a new situation, and which comes through humility, which comes through acknowledging that I don't know enough. So the thing is that you imagine yourself flying a plane or working in a factory, or working on a site, on a production line, and you are obviously an expert if you have been in this industry or in that profession for a very long time. And from time to time, when you encounter a surprise or a novelty or a turbulence or an event or an accident or an incident, please do not stay here with the rain stick. Come back to this place, come back to this place. Try to switch modes. There's a very, very good book. It's called and don't buy any of these books, either Gilval or I can send you it's a book called Flow. It's a wonderful book to read. And the idea is going back to the same thing, which is that many of us are working in this automatic mode all the time, every time. And one of the beauties of being an expert, as Gary Klein would say, is to realize that you don't know everything and you cannot know everything. So the switch from mind three to mind two, when the situation seems a little bit unfamiliar or unusual or non-routine, whatever you want to call it, is the essence of being a good expert. And that's where you can learn something new, because you could be in a profession for 20 years and have 20 years of experience, or you could be in a profession for 20 years and have 20 years of unique experiences. And that is expertise. And you can only do that when you're good at switching from mind three to mind two to mind one, back and forth, back and forth.
Ô, Nippin, agora é uma pergunta minha. Eu queria que você falasse qual que foi o teu sentimento quando você esteve a primeira vez com o Francesco Schettino, sabendo que ele era inocente.
I never use the word innocent or guilty. You see, it's such a good question, Baldir, because it's through subjectivity that we come to understand another person, right? It's through this idea that I am unique and you are unique. Not better or worse, we are different. You're Brazilian, I'm Indian by birth. We're different, and we will always be different, right? It's the idea that you bring a different myth to the world, and I bring a Hindu myth. You bring a Catholic myth, and I bring a Hindu myth. But at the core of it, at least we can have a conversation, right? And my myth is not better than yours. It's just a way of looking at the world. So when I listen to your myth, I must respect your myth, because it gives you meaning. Who am I to take it away from you? Who am I to tell this Aboriginal person that this is nonsense what you're doing? It's so arrogant to say that your myth of this rain stick is nonsense. How is that? How is that nonsense? And then I go and hang garlic outside my house to prevent evil. Or I do a root cause analysis and I call it science. It's arrogance, right? So we have to respect every person's beliefs. And when we do that, we enrich our experiences and we learn. Otherwise, we're always into this idea that Hindu myth is better than the Catholic myth, or the Catholic myth is better than the Hindu myth. No, they're different ways of looking at the world, and they're so powerful that they give us meaning, a very coherent meaning, a very powerful meaning. Who am I to take away that meaning from you when I come to Brazil? What do I know about your culture?
Muito obrigado. Então, agora, o Pedro e o Nippin comentam um pouco como que vai ser o evento aqui no Brasil.
Olha, antes de entrarmos aí, se me permitirem, gostaria de só fazer um comentário uma perspectiva minha sobre as perguntas que tenho estado a ver, e alguns pontos que foram aqui surgindo de forma mais ou menos recorrente. É muito difícil nós distanciarmos dessa ideia de que, alguns na nossa realidade, existe uma objetividade e que existe um certo e existe um errado, ou existe a maneira correta e tudo o que é errado. Aprender é, em grande medida, desmontarmos essa crença que temos tão enraizada em todos nós. É questionar-nos a nós próprios precisamente sobre isso. E isso remete para um ponto que surgiu aqui pelo menos 2 ou 3 vezes, que é essa ideia de just culture. Reparem que a expressão just culture remete, antes de mais, para isso mesmo. Existe uma cultura justa e uma não justa, ou a cultura justa e as que não são justas. A nossa realidade é construção nossa, é subjetividade, não é mais do que subjetividade. E não existe nenhuma fronteira, nem mesmo teórica, que nos diga, que nos permita separar aquilo que é correto, que é positivo e aquilo que é negativo. É aquilo que nós construímos a todo momento. E construímos isso ou através da aprendizagem, ou, como Carl Jung diz, na cegueira das nossas crenças. A pergunta que surgiu aqui também várias vezes é como é que então podemos começar a fazer esta mudança para um caminho mais de aprendizagem. E como o Nippin disse, é precisamente para começar por nós próprios. Começarmos pelas relações que nós construímos com os que nos estão próximos. É pela conversa e não pelo dictar, pelo dizer. E toda e qualquer mudança, profunda ou superficial, começa sempre localmente. E esse localmente é por nós próprios. Portanto, temos, antes de mais, deixar de acreditar que existe aí uma realidade objetiva atrás da qual devemos e podemos ir para melhorar, o que quer que seja. Isso não existe. Aquilo em que nós vivemos é a subjetividade que nós construímos individualmente e coletivamente. E a aprendizagem começa aí. Não sei se fez algum sentido ou se
Fez,
baralhou mais aí.
Pedro. Sim, sim, fez todo sentido, porque estava me incomodando muito essa comparação com cultura justa, mas eu estava um pouco temeroso quanto ao tempo. Mas você foi bem assertivo na hora de tomar esse assunto antes da gente passar adiante. Pedro, eu te agradeço, eu te agradeço por isso, e a gente verdadeiramente precisa. O convite de hoje que fica para mim é a gente deixar de assumir tantas platitudes como verdades, tantas pílulas prontas de prateleira e simplesmente engoli-las. Eu acho que a gente tem que saber que a gente produz, cada um produz as próprias enzimas, não é? Eu não sei se o Pedro e o Nippin já tinham passado por alguma metáfora digestiva dessa, mas me ocorreu agora. Nós produzimos as nossas próprias enzimas. Não adianta a gente achar que a mesma pílula vai servir para a mesma pessoa. Ok? Dito isto, por favor, Falem mais sobre o evento do Brasil. Eu ainda não comprei minha passagem. Eu vou sair de Rondonópolis, no interior do Mato Grosso, lá no Pantanal, e eu não tenho a menor ideia como é que o Felipe vai traduzir Pantanal para o Nipim. Te vira, Felipe. Eu vou sair lá do meio do mato, do Pantanal, que eu amo e só fui uma vez, e vou direto para o Rio de Janeiro, não volto nem para casa, porque eu quero encontrar esses dois caras aí. Por favor, falem para a gente como é que vai ser isso.
Nippin, you gonna start
Yeah,
or
I'll keep
should
it
I?
short. The event, you can see it on our website, novellas.solutions. And if you go on the events page, the event is right here in the middle. It's called Learning from Accidents, Rio de Janeiro. And if you click on it, you can get all the details in Portuguese, which Pedro can explain to you better than me. And this is the program. The event starts on the 30th of October and it ends on the 1st of November. The first 2 days is social psychology of risk and the SEEK training. And the third day, if you want me to come along, I can talk about my book and what learning really means and take us all on a semiotic journey. We'll spend some time together. We will have a nice meal together. We will share a meal and we will see how much more we learn when we experience learning. We have to feel and experience learning. A lot of Zoom, for example, this actually goes against my philosophy of learning. For learning to be effective, you have to meet people. So if this is something of interest, then obviously we can come and work together and do some big things. And this is an example of how the methodology works in practice. And there is a brochure that you can download, and yeah, it's got everything, and you can book it here. And yeah, is that helpful, Gilwell?
Sim, Nipim, foi muito bom, ajudou bastante, né? Então, só esclarecendo para as pessoas um pouco mais, os 2 primeiros dias, o Pedro vai apresentar o material todo em português, né? E no terceiro dia, o Nipim vai falar especificamente do livro e principalmente do Costa Concórdia em inglês. E aí eu acredito que não terá no terceiro dia, não terá tradução, não é isso, Nipim e Pedro?
Não está previsto. Temos de ver isso com o Josué, com o pessoal local, se é uma possibilidade, mas não está pensado, pelo menos para já.
Ok.
Mas pronto, tentamos deixar isto o mais flexível possível. As pessoas podem se inscrever só para os 2 dias iniciais, para os
Sim,
3 dias, se preferirem, só para o último dia em inglês.
isso.
Nos 3 dias tentaremos, entre mim e o Nippin, fazer com que seja o mais fluido e contínuo possível, mas naturalmente, à medida que vamos ver as inscrições, teremos em conta, tanto quanto possível, as pessoas que vêm só para os 2 dias, as pessoas que aparecem só para o terceiro dia, de modo a que tenhamos o grupo, ou todos integrados no grupo. Portanto, vamos, à medida que nos aproximamos, vamos tendo atenção a estes pormenores, apesar de haver aqui alguns desafios, não só a língua, que há de mudar dos 2 dias para o terceiro, mas há de ser uma experiência interessante, sem dúvida.
Sem dúvida, sem dúvida. E todos viram que o inglês do Nipim é um inglês fácil, né? Então acho que valeria demais a pena estarmos os 3 dias juntos, né? Muito bom. Nipim, alguma consideração final antes da gente se despedir?
Yes, in the first 2 days, as Pedro is speaking and Gilwell is with him, I will learn Portuguese, and the third day I will speak in Portuguese. If you buy me a couple of beers before 8 o'clock in the morning, then I can speak in Japanese or Portuguese or whatever you prefer.
Fantástico, Nipim. Fantástico. Gente, muitíssimo obrigado pela participação de todos. Valdir, Sabrina, eu particularmente queria dar um obrigado todo especial a vocês dois que estão comigo nessa jornada da psicologia social do risco desde o comecinho, né, desde o comecinho. Nós temos uma enorme missão de traduzir mais um livro do professor Robert Long, que é o livro It Works, né? E a gente está lutando para fazer essa tradução, principalmente por causa do nosso tempo, que é muito escasso, mas a gente prometeu isso para o professor Robert Long e a gente vai cumprir, né? A gente vai cumprir, traduzir esse livro. O Nipin já disse que também está disponível, né, para tradução o livro dele. Algumas pessoas, Nipin, perguntaram, né? Mas o livro do Nipin não tem em português? Ainda não, porque a gente tem muitos voluntários no Brasil, pessoas que trabalham por amor, né? Assim como eu, Valdir, a Sabrina, o Hugo, Caio Pimenta, o Anderson Neto, pessoas que comigo traduziram o For the Love of Zero, Por Amor ao Zero. Nós temos muitos voluntários, mas a gente precisaria ter mais. Pessoas que trabalham não por dinheiro, mas por amor. Então, eu conto que mais pessoas se juntem ao nosso time para a gente conseguir traduzir essa obra-prima do Nippin, Are We Learning from Accidents? Estamos aprendendo com os acidentes? Seria maravilhoso ter esse livro em português. Enquanto isso, eu fico maravilhado em ter Pedro Ferreira e Nippin Anand em plena tarde de sábado, que cederam o seu tempo em estar conosco, abrindo mão, né, da sua diversão, do seu descanso, das suas famílias, para distribuírem seus conhecimentos aqui conosco. Gente, muito obrigado a vocês dois. Muito obrigado ao Felipe. Da, quem gostou da tradução do Felipe, levanta a mão aí, né? Eu sou fã do Felipe. Muitíssimo obrigado. Nipim, você quer falar algo?
Yeah, you just took it from me. So nice. Such a wonderful professional translation from Felipe. So enjoyed listening to him as he was speaking so calmly, so professionally, so beautifully. And to all the Brazilians who came along on a Saturday morning, thank you. Thank you so much for joining.
Muito bem, gente. Muitíssimo obrigado a todos.
Do
Desejo.
you know,
Oi.
I used to be a sailor and I have traveled the west coast of South America, all the way from Panama down to Chile. I've never been to the other side.
Vai ser a
Yeah.
sua primeira vez no Brasil, não é isso, Nipim? E você vai começar pela segunda cidade mais bonita do Brasil, que é o Rio de Janeiro. Excelente escolha. Mas por que segunda? Porque a mais bonita de todas é a minha cidade, é em Fortaleza, Nordeste do Brasil. Claro, mas vale a pena, você está começando
Deus.
muito bem pelo Rio de Janeiro. Gente, tenham todos um abençoado final de semana e espero que vocês tenham aprendido o tanto que eu aprendi aqui. Até logo, gente. Valeu.
Obrigado. Bye.
Valeu, pessoal. Bye, bye.
Tchau.